Hi, everybody. This is Addie Van Salisbury on the Aspen Discovery team at Bywater Solutions. And today I want to talk about your ILS integration into Aspen Discovery and where we're going to set up that configuration. Aspen Discovery is able to connect to any ILS system. The way that Aspen can do that is because we are able to set up the configuration to speak to whatever ILS you have. So if I go into my administration menu and scroll down to the ILS integration, there's going to be an indexing profile section. So this is the meat of integrating your ILS with Aspen. If you click into here, you can click into the ID or scroll all the way to the far right and edit this. If you're implementing with Bywater Solutions, your implementer is going to go ahead and fill out the majority of this page. As we get to the bottom, there's going to be some settings that you need to play around with and make some decisions for you and your library. So again, this top part is just where we are telling Aspen where the data is and how we're talking to it, what ILS we are having that conversation with, where our record number lives, just some back-end things like that. One of the first decisions that you will want to think about is how we want to determine our audience. Aspen will go ahead and out of the box determine the audience by the bib record data. So this means that Aspen is going in and looking at different MARC fields to determine what that audience or reading level is of that record. This is important because that is one of our available facets that we can search on. So in our catalog on the left-hand side, you'll see this reading level. It might say audience. So it is important that we are able to have some data there. We can define it in another way. So we can define it with your collection, your shelf location, or a specified item subfield. If we chose specified item subfield, you need to put in what subfield you're specifying from. And if you choose to use an item determination, then you will need to create an audience map with all of the data that lives in whichever subfield you choose. I'll scroll back up really quickly. We're going to come back to the translation maps, but this is where they live. So again, if you choose to load audience from an item field, you'll need to create a translation map with all of the data that lives in that subfield. If you have a lot of values, we can load that from the database. So just ask your implementer to do that for you. We can also use regex on these maps. So if every code that starts with J is a juvenile audience, then we can use regex to indicate that where the code starts with J, then that audience is juvenile, and young adult, everything starts with YA, things like that. Again, we'll come back to the translation maps. So we'll continue down our indexing profile. We have an item information dropdown. Again, if you're implementing with Bywater Solutions, your implementer will fill this out as best as they can. If you are coming from a system other than Koha, they may need some help with filling this out. If you're coming from Koha, we're really familiar with that type of data, and we will be able to fill that out on our own. The one thing that you will need to decide here is whether or not you want to suppress itemless bibs in your catalog results. That's automatically turned on for all of our sites that we implement. Here, if you're familiar with Koha language, this location is referring to the branch code and specifically the holding branch. We do have the option to include or not include the branch name in the detailed location. So meaning when you're doing a search result, do you want the branch code to show here? The only time we recommend turning that off is if you're a single branch system. Again, most of this will be filled in for you, not too much to do here. If there's something you don't recognize, it might be in our list because of other ILS systems. This format information is where we're going to start to make some good decisions. So the format is going to automatically pull from your item type. We can define format in other ways as well, but item type is a good place to start. If you don't think item type will fully encompass your formats, let us know and we can talk about how we can further customize this mapping. So essentially the left-hand column is going to be your item type code. So what lives in the database, not what you see in your staff client. This format column, when we first load your data, is going to hold whatever that description is in your staff client, so what you're used to seeing. The reason we map things differently here is because this allows us to condense types and formats into less grouping so that patrons are potentially less confused and don't get information that isn't useful to them. So I know often we have to separate out item types. For example, you might have book and new book because you have different circulation times for those two types of items, but the patron doesn't necessarily need to know it's a new book when they're looking in the search results. So the format is what we're going to see here. These boxes. So it gives you the ability to condense those item types down into what you think would be useful for your patrons. If your patrons are really used to seeing things split out really granularly, then you're more than welcome to keep the format split out. But it is the opportunity to make the catalog a little more accessible for patrons, especially maybe the patrons that aren't power users that might not know as much about the circulation and the circulation rules. Our third column is our format category. You'll see we have 6 different options. These are going to be, if we scroll back up in our search, these icons up here. We then have a format boost. This isn't something you need to use, but it's your it's an ability to be able to edit the relevancy a little bit. So if you know that your patrons most likely are looking for audiobooks and books, and maybe they're not as interested in the reference, you can boost the book and audiobook formats to make them appear in search results more frequently or higher up the list. So it just gives you a little bit of control in our relevancy. Some partners leave all of these at 1, so that means the relevancy will just be based off of the code and the rules that Aspen has for itself. But again, it's just an ability for you to have a little bit more control over that. I recommend going from 1 to 12, 12 being the highest format boost and 1 being the lowest. Then we have a hold type column. Again, at the end of the day, Aspen is not going to allow any hold or any checkout that your ILS is not going to allow. It's going to base all of the circulation off of your rules that you have set in your ILS. However, we do want to provide the patron with an accurate ability. So if we're able to place bib level or item level or either, or no holds at all, we want to make sure to define that here based off of your item type. So if in your circulation rules, 1 hour and 3 hour, you're not allowed to place a hold, then we would want to define that no holds are allowed. With things like graphic novels, we want to make sure to allow them to either be able to place a bib or an item, we can define that here, or if we want to force them to choose which physical item they want, we can define this as an item only hold type. Again, this is just so we are giving the patrons the proper hold formats and decisions that they are capable of making on that item. But Aspen will default to whatever the ILS tells it can or cannot do. But we want to make sure that our patrons are not frustrated by not being able to place a hold where it looks like they should be able to. Then we have 2 more columns. We have a suppress and an in-library use only. If you choose to suppress an item type, that record or that item will not be findable in the catalog. And then in-library use only, we won't be able to place a hold, and there will be a little icon that lets us know that that's for in-library use only. These will be automatically updated as you add new item types into your ILS. I would just make sure to come in here and as you're adding item types to your ILS to make sure that the settings are accurate in Aspen as well. But if you ever need to manually add one, you can add new in this way. And then we have our status mappings. If you are a Koha library, these values will be the same for every partner that migrates with us. The values are what you will not change. This is what we're pulling from your ILS. If you're coming from another ILS with us, we'll work on filling this value out with you. It'll depend on what we define as your status field up in this item information section. Scroll back down. The status column in the second column, this is going to be what the patron sees when they click into the record. So if you want to change that language, you're more than welcome to do that here. The group status, we have several options. This is what we're going to see in the search results. So here, what kind of status are we looking at here? So again, status is when you click into the record, group status is in search results. You then can suppress by a status and define a status as in library use only. The order record field section is a Sierra specific section. So if you are coming from Sierra, we'll be able to fill out this section with you. If I were to click on a run full update and save my changes, this would do a fresh mark extract for my ILS. This isn't necessary often because Aspen is always looking for any changes happening in your ILS to update the records in Aspen. And then these translation maps are just the names of translation maps that we're using when we're doing some searches, which I'll jump into those to show you what we're going to do there. But on this indexing profile, the most important thing for y'all to go through is going to be your format information and the customization here and your status mapping. Again, I really encourage y'all to take this opportunity to condense some formats and make the catalog really easy for your patrons to find what they're looking for. I'm going to scroll back up and jump into the translation maps. So these translation maps may differ. Like I said earlier, if you choose to do the audience based off of an item field, you will create an audience translation map here as well. But we'll automatically populate translation maps based off of what we defined as your collection, as your item type, as your location, which is the branch, and your shelf location. So if we edit one of these, it'll automatically pull in the database code and what you've defined in your ILS as the translation or what that code stands for. So one thing is if you've already done this really cleanly in your ILS, the translation and the values should look pretty good. But you can always come in here and edit this if you want it to be a little bit cleaner and maybe not hold some codes like this. This will be different for every partner and every library. The reason that this is important is because we see collection, code information, item type information, and shelf location in the searches, and we're able to limit searches on all of these things. So even if we condense our formats based off our item types into less groups, if you'd like, you can add an item type facet either into the advanced search or in these facets on the side up here so that patrons or staff can continue to search based off of the item type. So that's why it's important to make sure that your item type map holds a translation that makes sense and looks nice. The same thing with collection code and shelf location. You can limit on those things as well. And some of that information is going to show in your search results and inside the record. So if I show my edition here, or if I do quick copy, this is going to show us some of that information And as we click into our records, we're going to continue to see some of the statuses and some shelf locations and collection codes. So just make sure that that looks how you'd like. We will talk about how to edit and add facets in a different video where we talked about catalog and grouped works. So if you're interested in finding out how to add item type or collection code or shelf location into your facets, just hop over to that video. Like most of our modules where we are pulling in records from somewhere, we always have an indexing log and a dashboard. Our indexing log is going to give us information about how and when we're pulling in records, if there were any errors, how many were added, if there were any deleted and updated, and there's always notes if there were errors. And then our dashboard is going to give us some statistics on how users are using those records. So specifically the records from your ILS, and also how users are logging in and if people are self-registering, because that is also a conversation we're going to have with your ILS. So that is how we pull in your data from your ILS and we set up that connection. If you have any questions, please let us know. If you have specific questions about mapping your formats, let your implementer know at your next meeting, and they'd love to give you suggestions about that. Thank you so much for watching.